I just recently watched the behind the scenes of the making of Evergreen with Pentatonix. I love watching behind the scenes videos because it's just as an artist myself, I feel like there's such an opportunity to learn in those things. Just seeing how they do all the different things, and it's like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. Would have never thought to do that, or just seeing how artists work, I think is really cool. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to hear the people that were involved and their process on and their involvement? So, can you give a little bit of for people that aren't familiar, a little bit of backstory on you, but also can you give your involvement in this Evergreen album?
Sure. So I saw the same video, and it was funny because, I'm here on the other coasts doing the mixing. So a lot of the stuff in that video was new to me as well, because I just wasn't over there. But that's sort of been my relationship with them. We did work when they were on the Sing Off and I worked on the Sing Off. We were in the same place at the same time. So we worked, physically together a few times then. But since then, I've run into him a few times, but when we're working, it's always been remotely. So on email and over Zoom and text messages and things, which is just, kind of how the world is now. But it's interesting to have a relationship like that that's lasted a decade, Yeah. So that's when I met them and got to know them, and we've been working since then. So basically I mixed all but one track and did the, vocal editing and tuning and all those kind of cleanup things as well. For most of them, I had my guy Ted, who helps me out with that, also did a few of them. And like I said, I was working remotely. One funny thing about this album is that the previous few projects, we were all at home. So they were doing DIY rigs with their own mic, just in their bedroom, or with some foam up or whatever. And I was mixing, here in my room, which nice full range speakers and subs and everything's tuned and all that stuff. And then for this album, they were so eager to get back into the studio that they really went and, booked a lot of time at a great studio with great engineers and great mics and all this stuff. But I was on vacation that week. So I actually mixed the album on my MacBook with headphones plugged straight into my MacBook.
Stop it.
So we did the complete reversal of who was doing high end and who was doing DIY stuff for this album.
That's actually so fascinating to hear. Just because the more and more interviews that I have and speak to people, I realize more and more it breaks down this mold of, obviously you have the gear that you to do all this great stuff, but you don't always need all the gear. It's so much more in your experience and your talent as an artist yourself than it is in the gear that you hold. Because so often, artists starting off are like, oh, I need to buy this and get this plugin and get this thing, and I need to soundproof my studio and I need to make sure that everything is perfectly the way it needs to be. But it's really all about just practice and practicing your craft, and you could make it's mind-blowing actually to hear that, because it sounds so good, but it was mixed on your MacBook Pro or MacBook whatever, without all your fancy tech in your studio. It's amazing.
Well, I think it shows both sides of it, because on one hand it shows you it is doable. On the other hand, it's not till you get used to having some things and then you don't have them anymore that you realize how much you appreciate them and enjoy them. The biggest thing I noticed was that working in my own studio here is comfortable. And, when you have your own place and you work in it for a long time, it's the little things, you get your ergonomics worked out, your desk is the right height, your chair is the right height, your speaker is the right at your ear level, everything's comfortable. And then you get to, I was at literally in a hotel room on vacation, and it's oh, my desk is 3 inches too low, and at the end of a long day then my wrist hurts, and this chair is not comfortable, and little things like that make you appreciate your own situation.
Yeah. Was there any tech that you missed from or gear that you missed from your studio that you wish you could have had while you were mixing remotely?
When I mix here, I'm completely inside the box, partially because the way I came up was learning in the box and, learning in my 20s when we're moving around all the time. So having, a studio wasn't really ever an option. So I really came up and inside the box. And one aspect of that is I never want to be someplace and not be able to print a mix. The idea of recalling a console to me is so what would I do if I had to recall an analog console every time I needed to print and mix, especially with like, if the nature of your work is like mine, where you're doing several projects every single day and you never know who's going to call out of the blue and say, oh, can you print the one thing without a lead vocal or whatever? And you're like, well, if you had to recall it, it would take a long time. But if it's just on your laptop, no matter where you are, even if you didn't have headphones, you could just bring it up, mute the vocal and send it back. So I've sort of been stubbornly in the box. And so really when I'm not here, the thing I miss most is, my monitoring system and being able to listen down to 30 hertz knowing it's flat. Whereas when you're on headphones, there's always some guesswork, and there's it's like, oh, I can hear the bass, but I can't feel the bass. I don't know what the bass feels like. And I will say the revision process went long enough that by the very end of it, I was back in my room. So I did get, a couple passes of the album, hearing it here. And there would be things that was like, oh, like I couldn't tell this in my headphones, but like there's some 125 hertz. It's just too much, the entire song, maybe mastering would nab it, but I'm glad I got it here. So it's both sides of it. At the same time, it was like, oh, I could still mix an album from a laptop in a chair the way I could when I was, 26 or whatever.